Okay, and I will now call the Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Caitlin, can you proceed with the roll call, please?
Trustee Doherty.
Here.
Trustee Gagani.
Here.
Trustee Humphries.
Yes.
Trustee Kuntia.
Here.
Trustee Stapleton.
Yes.
President Graber.
Yes, thank you very much, Caitlin. We're now on to agenda item number 3, public comment. Do we have, I'm assuming we don't have any public comment items, but Jen, would you confirm that?
We don't.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, for the star of the show, we're on to agenda item number 4. Could you introduce Rashida Graham-Washington?
Rashida Graham-Washington is our consultant who is with us tonight. She has started all of the listening sessions with staff. Those actually began early yesterday, and yesterday concluded with a community listening session. She's had another full day today and has yet another one tomorrow. Rashida actually came to us on a recommendation from the Oak Park Public Library, David Seleb, where she had done some work with the Oak Park Library. She's amazing. Rashida has done work. She's been a teacher, a small business owner, and a consultant. She does this work all in many different with many different kinds of organizations, and we are very fortunate to have her with us here at the library.
Julie, thank you so much for that warm introduction. I should have recorded it so I could play it back for my husband, because you said all the right things. I'm like, see, look, babe, this is great. Look, this is me. Thank you so much for that. It has been really remarkable, the experience I've had to this point. And I do want to jump right in with the board so that I don't present too much bias in what I've already experienced. But I will just briefly say that this is a team of folk who I would be delighted to experience in my my library experiences myself personally. It's just been a joy to work with the team up to this point. And given the prickly nature of the topic, it's not always the case that it is such a smooth and open and transparent process. So I'm really grateful for the time I've been able to share with the team to date. As Julie said, my name is Rashida Graham-Washington, and I serve as the principal consultant for RGW Consulting. Obviously, RGW are my initials, but it also stands for Reimagining and Generating Wonder, because our hope is that that's exactly where people will start, whether we're talking about leadership development, organizational change, or strategic planning, and or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We're hoping that people will get curious about what their ideals are, do an assessment of where they actually are, and allow RGW to come alongside them to mine the gap between where they hope to be and where they are today. And we see a lot of opportunities in what we've experienced of Downers Grove Public Library to date to do just that. So I've done somewhere between 50 and 20 listening sessions between yesterday and today. I have about 10 more to do between now and Saturday. Those listening sessions were comprised of affinity groups across race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, department, agency, passion for the work, and also we've already done one community listening session, as Julie already shared, with the hope of just gleaning where people see DEI working, where they see the challenges, where they see opportunities for next steps, and then also an invitation for them to share in whatever ways they want that would inform the work going forward. I will take all of those comments and responses into consideration as I develop impressions over my listening. The impressions that I will develop are the ones that will show up in my impressions report once the listening sessions have concluded, and I will use those impressions to develop a trajectory based on recommendations for how DGPL should proceed in its DEI endeavors. If this call is being recorded, it is only because you all have elected to record it. I'm not recording anything on my end. I do use a note-taking software that is not visible to my team or other clients. It's called HoneyBook. I put my notes there. Only I can see them unless I give access to a member of my team to be able to see them. So there's quite a bit of anonymity in the protocol that we use to ascertain the information we need to develop the report. Once the report has been completed, I will send that report to Julie, and I'm open to having a meeting about the report with Julie and whomever else is designated to attend and participate in that convening. Are there any questions about the protocol? All right. Then I will start with my series of 4 to 5 questions. These are the same questions that I've asked across all of the listening sessions to this point. As you answer those questions, if you share information that causes me to become more curious, I will take a deeper dive into that topic. I'm more interested in what you have to share with me than I am with covering all of my questions. The main thing is to get to the crux of the information you have to share towards the report and the trajectory. So if there are no other questions or comments, we will get started on the protocol now. All right. My first question is as follows. Oh, wait, where are my glasses? As you prepare to respond, especially because I'm on my phone tonight, I don't have GoToMeeting on my device. So if you could respond by stating your name and how long you have served as a trustee, that would be helpful to my data intake. And then after you've done that the first time, all you have to do if you respond after the first time is simply state your first name, and then you can respond after that. So question 1 is, if you were to explain the current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Downers Grove Public Library to a stranger or new acquaintance over coffee, what would you say to them?
This is Carissa Doherty. I think I've been a trustee for 2 years, I think two-ish years. If I were to explain this to an acquaintance, explain the state of DEI to an acquaintance about the state at DGPL, I think it'd be it's just saying that we're kind of in a state of figuring out what's next. So the library is committed to acting and upholding values related to diversity and inclusion. They've tried some things, and now we're trying to figure out what's next. And in doing so, trying to understand better what the community wants from its library as well. So we're on the path, but we haven't arrived at our destination yet, and it's going to be a while before we get there. But we're trying really hard to figure out what that path is, and doing that with the help of our community members and our community leaders and community organizations that we have relationships with.
Thank you, Carissa.
Rashida, my name is Kim Stapleton. I believe I've been a trustee a little longer than Carissa, so a little over 2 years. And the comments that I would make in those 2 years is I have been very appreciative of the community events we did on homelessness, the policing event that was very recently, and now I was telling people that we were doing this training this evening. So those are the 3 examples of community outreach in different areas.
Thank you.
My name is Dave Humphreys, and I've been a trustee for eons. I believe it's 24 years or something like that. But and I don't have a lot of words to put around this, but I feel that the library has done a commendable job, both the board and the staff. Intuitively, way I can put it is kind of good people doing good things and treating the community well. But I think we need more structure to this and a little more proactivity. And that's, I believe, what we kind of put into the strategic plan. We're not bad people doing bad things, but we need to be more proactive, both as a board and as a staff, at engaging our community in these ways. So
Thank you.
I hope that didn't come across negative. It intended to come across positively.
No, that was fine, Dave. Thank you.
Hi, this is Bernali Kuntia. It's been exactly a year. I joined last year as a trustee. I would sort of echo what Dave was saying. I think that there's a real concerted effort to do better, but I think that it's sometimes easy just to do the same things. So now that as a board we are really trying to make a change, and the staff knows that we support them in making that change, that they are willing to sort of move in that direction. I think that maybe they didn't know that they had our support, and now that they know we really believe in this mission, and we really believe in the strategic plan, and we believe in moving the community forward and the library forward. So I think that's encouraging the staff to also want to move forward.
Thank you.
Hi, Rashida. This is Swapna Gigani. I've been a trustee since 2017. And yeah, similar to the other trustees, I would say that the library's intent is certainly there to have more of a DEI initiative. But in terms of it kind of looking outwards to our community in the form of programming that's really engaging the patrons, I think that's where we have a lot of room for improvement. And it's definitely been apparent that that has been happening, but I would say we need more of that in the next few years. But I would say Julie's been doing a great job just from the ground up, changing the verbiage of our documents. Our strategic plan has all reflected the intent, but it's more just kind of getting it moving and outwards.
Thank you.
Hey, Rashida, this is Jonathan Graber. I've been on the board, I believe, for 4 years, and I think I will just echo, I think mostly Carissa and Swapna's comments that I think that the intent to do the right thing in these areas is there, and we're trying. And I think these sorts of events and other events, it's just we need help, I think, to continue pushing this forward. And something Carissa said as far as like reaching a destination. I mean, I guess the way I personally do it is like kind of the journey is the destination to a certain extent. It's like we're just trying to get better every day.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Rashida, just so you know, because I can see on the GoToMeeting here, I think that was comments. I think that included comments from all of the board members.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to ask a question that I think is central to the board's role. As I've been developing my impressions, one of the things that has become pretty evident is that much of what you are saying has been echoed by by the staff, that there's a great intentionality and desire to do this work. There's a need for support in terms of what are our next steps, what direction do we take. But one of the sources of tension, I think, rests in the notion that the staff will feel hesitant to lean into DEI aspects of the organization's culture out of a concern for the way that some community members might respond, particularly as taxpayers. Can you, the board of directors, give me a sense of what your response might be and what kinds of solutions we might deploy, given that we know there is this at least duplicitousness, if not, I would even say a multiplicitousness in how the community might respond to such robust DEI integration. How can you as the board see yourselves responding to those contentions from the staff and from the community?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I can repeat the question. So one of the things that the staff has intimated more than once over the last 24 hours is their concern that they will get patrons who come in and say, I'm a taxpayer and I don't want my taxes being mobilized in this way. I'm a taxpayer and I don't want the library to be leveraged towards politicism. I'm a taxpayer and I don't understand why we're just reacting and responding to the landscape of the country right now. That's not what the library is for. That's not the role of the library. How will you as a board respond and support the staff as it pertains to those concerns?
My first thought was when Julie shared with us the library's Black Lives Matter statement, which was very bold and put up on the website right away. She showed us positive feedback from the community to help support our comfort level there, right? And so that's what I would, as a trustee, help support the staff. And they've seen, they've been strong before with issues in the community regarding diversity. And so just that they know they have our support is what my position.
Okay.
This is Dave. And again, I have trouble verbalizing some of these things sometimes, but the staff will have my total support. I think that we have seen in the past that the vast majority of our constituencies in the community support these principles, these DEI principles. And we've seen that more than one time over the last 4 or 5 years, especially. The staff, on the other hand, I mean, well, when we've had incidences and people have come to meetings and spoken out and gone to village council meetings and spoken up and things like that, I think there's a great deal of support for DEI. Not 100%, but a great deal of support. And we, as leaders of the community, need to educate the remaining few percent.
Mm-hmm.
The staff, on the other hand, sees individual patrons who sometimes speak anonymously and sometimes in person. And I think we need to give the staff, and this is part of the proactivity I think I was talking about, give the staff and help the staff develop the tools and the confidence to respond in a constructive educational way to people who voice concerns to them. And but I think we need to stay on track and it's part of our strategic plan, and I guess I'm repeating myself, but we need to help the staff develop tools to deal with that.
Perfect, thank you.
I think also, this is Bernali, that libraries are fundamentally inclusive and are supposed to be welcoming to everyone. And so as much as there are those few people who maybe say things about whether tax money is going, I think for us as a board to fully support, fully stand behind the library's mission and whatever, whatever agendas we put out there for what is important to us as a community. And in general, libraries are places for learning, and libraries are places for growing. And so that is for me, that is our goal. And so that is also how we would support then the staff and Julie in making those statements be true. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Swapna, and I just wanted to agree with what Bernali said. I do think that the library's, intent or purpose is to provide materials for people that include just a wide variety of subject matters, and some of those subjects, some of that programming is not going to be something that appeals to everyone, but it is our responsibility to provide it. In terms of the staff, I almost hesitate to expect any and all staff to be able to respond to patrons' complaints, but I think Julie has demonstrated on numerous occasions her ability to kind of take those complaints and be extremely tactful, extremely informative, and extremely responsive in her responses to that. So I think just kind of staying true to what we have laid out, a publicly published document in our strategic plan, and then just kind of trusting Julie's ability to communicate is kind of where I would say we stand.
Thank you.
This is Carissa. I don't know if I have any like a ton more to add in terms of how to provide support, because I think it's still a little bit uncharted territories, except that of course, as my colleagues just said, I do support the staff and support the library in this goal. I think I just want to reflect on that sentiment maybe that you're hearing, Rashida, from the staff, because I think up until this point, as I think all of us a lot of us mentioned the answer to the first question, what the library's done so far has been pretty safe in a lot of ways. And so reflecting on how moving into what might feel like an unsafe territory for whatever reason, whether that's based in reality or perception or both, or anything around that, it's got to be scary. I mean, it's scary for everybody, and I think there's that fear on both sides then and having two sides that are fearful for different reasons maybe makes for a difficult relationship and a difficult potentially confrontation. So I just want to reflect on like that is, I can tell, I know that that's a real concern and a real fear, and I think we can say as a board that we support the policies and we support the staff, but in the end this is a thing that we've not done before, and it's going to be scary, and I think we need to just even acknowledge that would be an important part of supporting the staff.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other responses to that question?
I think I'm the final person to speak on this question. And I'll just kind of follow up to what Carissa was saying. I think that I completely agree. I think the approach generally, or at least speaking for myself, is to kind of try to stay in those safe places and stay, it's tough to kind of make kind of the dramatic changes. And I think that we as a board, since I've been involved, and I think for many years before that, have supported the DEI initiative, and I just think that from my perspective, it's like kind of coming back, and I think maybe you're preparing kind of a final report at the end of this. It's like how can we do better? Like what steps can we big. Because I think that's part of my issue is I'm not sure what else I can do. And so I need that guidance.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes in the discovery process, I feel like I'm doing a little bit of a dance where I ask the client and then the client asks me. And that's just proof that we're at the beginning, and I think that's okay, to your point.
I think I was the final on that question, just so you.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Oh, I just said I think that I was the final person to answer that particular question, just so you.
Yes. So to that point, was that Jonathan?
Yes.
Okay, to your point, Jonathan, what do you imagine your collective board of directors development to implement and support DEI needs to entail? What, if you can imagine anything, and maybe you don't know, maybe your answer will be, Rashida, that's what we're hoping you will tell us in this report. But if there are things that you might imagine now that you would need support on as a board in order to be supportive in your governance and policy implementation, what would those things be?
I mean, it's interesting because, like, from my perspective, I think that we've done kind of all of the right things on paper as far as the strategic plan and, revising our kind of the internal, the bylaw. I mean, we've done the things kind of, as I said, kind of on paper. I think that at the end of the day, we have to go beyond that. And I don't know if, I don't know if, one thing I've thought about is, how do we reach out to more diverse communities when we're hiring people? Like are we taking active steps to look for people? We have a diverse community. I mean, Downers Grove, I mean, I mean, there is a lot of diversity here, and I think that we need to make sure that that's represented, at the library and at all of our, public institutions. And so I would say that's one thing from my perspective that I've thought about is like, what could we take additional steps to kind of further that objective?
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone else? What do you imagine your development to implement and support DEI needs to entail?
This is Carissa. I don't know if this is specific to the board. I think it's probably something the library in general needs to develop and understand better. Is, we're kind of, in so many cases we're kind of saying, well, what do they need? They being like this kind of unknown other person who's not us. And I think that's kind of, it's a difficult thing to imagine, but we also don't necessarily know what all of our community members need. We know what the vocal ones need, maybe the ones that are already engaged with us and the ones that come and complain to Julie or the staff or us or whoever. But I don't know if we understand what the community expects from us and what, specifically maybe more marginalized parts of our community expect from us. And I kind of just want to understand what that looks like so that we're not making assumptions and then like missing the mark completely and then, further disenfranchising these other groups or just kind of not understanding what the fundamental need is. So I think there's kind of an element of like baseline understanding. Again, I don't think it's specific to the board. I think it's the library in general, and I think that's what you're trying to do. But that would be very helpful to understand just what are people looking to us for that we're not providing right now. Clearly there are things, and we could guess about those things, but it'd be good to hear directly and understand more directly what the expectations are.
Sure.
This is Dave. I'll echo that, I guess. I don't want to restate it, but we have in some respects a pretty diverse community, in some respects not. But there are many sides to DEI. You know, whether we're talking LGBTQ+, whether we're talking homeless people, Black Lives Matter, age groups, differently abled groups. We don't always hear from these people. We think we know what they want, or we at least try to respond when they speak up. But I was talking earlier about being more proactive. Maybe we need to ask them in some forms. I know that you're conducting these listening sessions, and that is a good start. But are we getting good, diverse turnout to these sessions? Are we hearing from the Black Lives Matter group? Are we hearing from the LGBTQ community? Are we hearing from the homeless community? All of these, we are part of our community and part of our constituency that we should be serving and listening to and hearing from. I'm not sure we are yet.
Well, and this is Swapna, just to I guess piggyback off of Dave's comment. I don't know that I see Downers Grove as a diverse community currently. I think that I would say the challenge of the library is, are we trying to add programming and add services and add diversity to educate people and to educate, you know, maybe myself about Black Lives Matter or about the LGBTQ experience? Are we trying to do that, or are we trying to serve those specific communities? And I think there's two different types of programming in that. And we also have to recognize that maybe some people fall more into the first bracket than the second.
Yes, that's something that has been perpetually made salient over the last 2 days. The distinction between, given that the library is a public space of neutrality, part of the role of the library is to educate people on all of the historically, intentionally, traditionally marginalized people groups, whether or not they see those groups represented or not. And then the other aspect is, when those groups are represented in Downers Grove, are they getting the services that they need and require as community members and as taxpayers as well? So we've been naming those two streams of programming and getting curious about how we respond to those streams in a differentiated manner.
I think that part about education is very valid, and it had not crossed my mind until you said that, Swapna. I do Blessings in a Backpack, where we send home food on the weekends with kids. And when we did a fundraiser for that, the community between all of the elementary school districts was just amazed to know that we have someone in every school. They're like, really? There's kids at our school? I did not know this, right? And so within our library, we have the free little pantry, and that is part of an educational process, I would think, for different patrons. And so I think that's what we would need to continue developing and educating.
I think a third thing I would name that has become an impression for me is just educating historically, intentionally, traditionally marginalized people groups on the services that are available and how they can get access to those services when privilege and entitlement that often provides accessibility is not afforded to them in the same way. So even if you have the programming that's available, that's supposed to be historically, intentionally, traditionally marginalized people group facing, or resources or benefits from the library that are historically, intentionally, traditionally marginalized people group facing, but they have limited access because they're not aware. There's a lane of educating and making people aware there also that might have to look a little bit different than how the library has done that, customarily speaking. Another thing that I will name that I think bears some attention is how are we defining literacy? And how are we making access, how are we differentiating access points for literacy based on cultural orientation? So if we're talking, and I'll just give this example based on age. When I was in undergrad, most everything I used in order to make myself more literate was a printed document. It was a book, a periodical, some sort of series of magazines or analytical references and these kinds of things. That's how I got through undergrad, right? But as I look at my middle daughter now, who will be 20 in November, what she chooses, selects for her, what she self-selects in order to educate herself isn't any of those things. She often uses music as a medium. She uses a lot of podcasts as mediums. She relies, much to my chagrin, often on access points related to social media. And how she is making herself literate looks very different because she is 30 years my junior. So how are we defining literacy, and how we define it will dictate how we create access points to it, and how the library approaches its mission, its vision, its bylaws and governance will be informed by how broad or narrow we're defining literacy in 2020, and which cultural access points have been prioritized and why, I think will be a question that we need to consider. I don't have answers. It will be even more challenging to get those answers from such a far away distance from the actual tangible library, but I think we'll have to do some searching for some of those responses. And I know people like Joy and Amy and Aaron will be incredibly helpful in helping us to pin that down.
Just a quick, this is Dave, just a comment on, following a comment to that. We had a little difference in how we define the diversity of Downers Grove, or at the beginning, and to the extent that Downers Grove is not diverse, is it because of how we define literacy, how we staff public services? Do we provide welcome to marginalized groups, or do we provide, perhaps inadvertently, barriers to them? I mean, if they walk into a community facility and all they see is white faces, white European faces, what does that say to them? Now, do we think about that? Perhaps not. But
is that you,
could
Dave?
That could even include the library.
Is that Dave speaking?
Yes, this is Dave.
Okay, and so Dave, to your point, the reading starts before the reading starts, right? Because we read a room and we read the aesthetic, and we read interactions and engagements, and we read the way language is conveyed. And so we become literate about the library before we decide whether or not we will allow the library to engage in our literacy trajectory. We're reading the library before we read in the library. And I think that is the equity lens that I want to get curious with the board about. How are other cultures, how are genders, how are sexual orientations, how are ability leanings, people with different ability leanings, how are they reading the library, and what are they learning by way of how the library defines literacy before they ever pick up a resource? And I think that's a place where executive leadership, management, and the board can work together to get that read from an equity lens, and that will then help us to shape and form how we move forward from there. I caught a little bit of your conversation before we started this part where you were talking about some aesthetic pieces. Those are perfect examples of part of what we read before we decide whether or not we will read.
And Rashida, I think that's a really good point. And this is Bernali. You know, a few years ago, and Dave and Jonathan probably know exactly when it happened, there was a mural painted in the children's library. And there was a big unveiling of the mural, and everyone is excited. And I have two dark-skinned brown children who were mortified. And I was so upset because this mural that everyone else is celebrating has all of the dark-skinned characters as the villains. And it was so upsetting to me, and no one else seemed to notice except for other Black and brown mothers. And everyone else was like, this is amazing. And I just thought, did no one watch this being painted? Did no one realize this was happening? And then, you know, before I became a board member, the same muralist was invited to come back again. And then before I had become a trustee, I went and sat down with Julie and was like, you can't invite the same person back again. They clearly, whether it was intentional, as Swapna has said, you know, and impact is always greater than intent, always. And when children walk into the children's library and they see all the bad guys as dark-skinned, it is that exactly what you said. Literacy happens before you even pick up a book. And so it's not a welcoming space, and my children never wanted to go play in it. So I those are the little things that sometimes, you know, I think that we miss the mark on, and people just don't know. And because their experience is really different, the life experience is different, they don't see things the same way that perhaps, you know, a Black and brown parent would see it. So I appreciate you saying that receiver begins before you pick up the book. If the space is not welcoming, then no one is going to come. So.
Yes, I think we can do some work to kind of try to strengthen our lenses toward equity by using an equity framework to funnel our decision making through, and that's something I would recommend in the report for the board to get around together. Similarly, we've developed with Oak Park an anti-racism advisory team, and I'll just give you this quick example. In light of everything that's going on in our country right now, there was a white woman who reached out to the library because she wanted to donate a series of canvases that she had painted and they were called, I think they were called Say Their Names. And they were beautiful. They were great. And the executive director brought her intimation to want to make the donation to the anti-racism advisory team, and they said no, because if they were going to commission art for a topic like Say Their Names, which is a part of the Black Lives Matters movement, it should be from Black artists, and they should be paid for their work, so that we are not creating another equity issue and creating that equity issue on top of an appropriation issue. And if that advisory team had not been in place, that would have just felt like a really remarkable, well-meaning thing to do. And Dave was very clear. He's like, I'm not sure I would have got it. I might have missed the mark on that one. And that's why I think it is important to have those teams in place to help us see in our blind spot.
This is Carissa. I think some of what we're talking about just now, and this idea of having a lens through which we view things, I mean, certainly that part's important, but I think it goes back to a comment actually a couple people made earlier, I think maybe Jonathan, Dave, a couple people, about having staff who also have those lived experiences of being a person of color or a person, you know, identifying as a transgender individual. So I think having more diversity among the staff would not negate the need for the lens for kind of people
Sure.
from different perspectives, but it would put those lived experiences already in place. And if we, you know, allow that everyone to have a voice and to feel safe about voicing their objection to something like you're describing, Barnelli, then I don't think we would get around situations like that, but at least there would be more diverse perspectives to begin with, so that hopefully there wouldn't be that point where we're going, wait, what just happened, because no one saw this. That might be that pipeline and staffing issue might be a way to help shore up that aspect of it.
I definitely see that as a yes and for sure, Carissa. One thing that I would add is that, so I've been using this metaphor for couple days, that when I bake cookies, I put all my dry goods in one bowl and all my wet ingredients in a separate bowl, and I mix them up separately first before I combine them, because if I combine them all at once, I end up with lumps. And I think I think we first have to do some landscaping to ensure readiness, because otherwise we're going to be putting BIPOC individuals in harm's way, causing trauma and difficulty for them unless we've already kind of paved some of the way. So I certainly see it as a yes and, but I think have some things that we can do to ensure that when we bring on that staff, we're not bringing them into traumatic circumstances, or at least mitigating it to the extent possible. We're not going to ever be able to control every comment a patron makes and this kind of thing, but I think there are yet some steps we could take to mitigate the harm and damage that will otherwise happen to BIPOC community members who work in the current context.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Rashida.
Sure. Any final thoughts or questions? Maybe something I didn't ask, but you understand the context of DGPL and you understand the context of Downers Grove. I was born and raised in Chicago my whole life. I'm very familiar with your context. I graduated from Proviso West High School, so I know the suburban area, surrounding West suburban area pretty well. But I'm still very open to anything you would want to share with me that maybe I haven't asked about.
I will just mention a couple of sort of interesting little stories of mine over the years. I had a situation when I was in law school where, you know, I always took kind of the same route in, and there was one particular day where the traffic was really bad and I couldn't get to kind of my typical destination, so I parked and I was taking the L and into Chicago. I just, for a little bit of background, I grew up in a small town in Michigan. There's very little diversity, and I remember getting on the train and there was no other white people on the train, and it was like the best experience for me to it was like one of these things where I was thinking about how many times does somebody who's black or brown have to get on a train or go to a place where there's just white people, and that's just sort of like a standard thing. And so I just felt like it just really opened my eyes. And the other situation happened maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I had some people who we had a meeting, and we were meeting with some other another firm basically. And after the meeting, there were a couple males and I think 2 or 3 females kind of on my team, and then there was a group of people from this other firm. And immediately after they left, there was maybe 6 or 7 people from this other firm. The females who were on my team said, I can't believe that it was all men that they brought. It was all men that they brought to this meeting. And we sat in this room for probably an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that never registered to me that they had brought all men to this meeting. And so I think from my perspective, a lot of it is, I think we all have like the right intentions, but it's just trying to be more sensitive to these issues and then trying to figure out a way to not only become more sensitive ourselves but also then, in our roles as trustees, how do we move that needle within the community for the community itself to be more sensitive?
Yeah, I think everything you just shared is really valuable and significant and important. And to your point, you just can't have a lens to certain things until you have a lens to certain things. I had to go all the way to Democratic Republic of Congo to recognize that I had privilege. And I resisted and resisted and resisted. And every day I was there, it became more evident. And I'm really grateful for those lessons, because now when I travel globally, I travel from a very different posture, depending on what country I'm in. It's just not the same as when I'm here in this country. Context, geography, all of that matters. But if you've never been exposed to certain ways of being, you just can't see it in the same way. So I'm excited for this work, because I'm excited to be able to support some lens crafting in that regard, alongside the staff and the board and the community as well, because there is also going to be, and I don't think we've named this on this call, but it's certainly come up over the last couple of days, the necessity to acculturate dominant culture patrons to this new way of being for some of them, right? Like, otherwise we bear the risk of creating culture shock, because this is a cultural immersion that is counter-cultural to what they have traditionally experienced in Downers Grove at large, and also possibly at the library as well. And if we're going to be holistic and integral in our approach, that means that we also have to consider how we manage change for other patrons who represent dominant culture ways of being. So there is, you're correct in stating that there's a great work ahead indeed. But I think the team that I've experienced over the last 24 hours is certainly up for the challenge. Any final remarks for the evening?
Well, just I agree with you. I think they're up for the challenge too. And I'm very much looking forward to your comments after this resolves, both of us and the staff and the community and so forth. I don't know whether there's anything like a DEI audit or something of that sort. I think I made the comment at the very beginning that I think we have a bunch of well-intended people who are doing well-intended things, but we need somebody from the outside to tell us, and I think we're getting to that to some extent, but what we're doing right, what we're not doing right. I have, over the years, done some work with homeless people in Downers Grove, and there are a lot of people in Downers Grove who don't recognize that there are any homeless people in Downers Grove.
Sure.
But I encountered just last week sort of a DEI, well, I don't know how to phrase it. I don't want to make it sound negative, but quite frankly, it was a Black transgender woman who was homeless and marginally literate. And I was talking with her, and I suggested a couple of ways that perhaps she wanted to improve her literacy. And one of the things I suggested perhaps was you might check out the public library, and maybe there would be some things that might be able to be of assistance to her. And her first reaction is, there's nobody like me there.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody marginally literate, there's nobody transgender, and there's nobody Black.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think of those things a lot. If it's called to our attention, I think as good people, we want to do something about it, but we need, and the staff, I think, is the same way. but we need to develop the tools. First, we need to develop the recognition. And sometimes it's somebody from the outside that needs to point that out to us. But then we have to develop the tools and make sure that the staff knows that we are behind them. And it also means we have to listen to the staff. And I realize we don't normally listen to staff directly. We kind of filter things through Julie. But I would like to be sure that, especially after this conversation, that in the future, when the staff has encounters from people from the community who are questioning our actions in DEI, that those be reported to the board so we know what's going on in our community on this topic.
I have some tools, Dave, I commit to you. For auditing purposes, for professional development purposes, all of those things will be a part of the report, indeed.
Wonderful. This is exciting. This is an opportunity.
It is.
And I just wanted to add to a couple things that Dave just said. One, kind of the sentiment that, you know, we're up for the challenge, that we have a lot of good people trying to do good things, that we don't have to do them by ourselves. There's other organizations, there's other partners in our community that we can work with to do some of this. And I know, I have to say, I mean, I am one of those people, maybe not that was like ignoring the homeless problem in Downers Grove, but just kind of didn't realize the extent and kind of how different services were provided until I became a member of the board. And so, and you know, a lot of the partnerships, the community partnerships that were developed over the last year have been tremendous. And I'd love to see us continue to leverage that because, yeah, we're good intention. There's other good intention people out there that can be partners with us on this journey and on this road to understanding better what our community needs. So while certainly we can do it and we can pull ourselves up and look, you know, build our toolkit, we don't have to do it alone. There are people like Rashida, of course, you know, who's helping us right now, but then also beyond this conversation, you know, other people that we can reach out to that will certainly support us, and we can support each other in doing all this work.
And one of the things I would just add is, even as you talk about the different partners you have within your town, which I think is great because you share geographical context. I personally am working with Glen Ellen, Downers Grove, Skokie, Oak Park, and pretty soon Vernon in Lincolnshire, their library as well. And so if you have 5 libraries working with the same DEI methodology around some of almost identical challenges and growth points, I think there's a lot of synergy in having those conversations, and I'm excited about how I can get you all talking to one another. I suspect you already are, which is how I got to so many places, but how do we synergize the DEI strategies and implementations that are happening within driving distance from one another across libraries in our area? I think that's another really exciting opportunity and gift that we have, because all of you will have gone through the same discovery protocol. You will all have different reports because your reports will be differentiated based on what your findings are, but many of the points that you want to work on are similar. And so there's a professional learning opportunity, I think, that's also pretty ripe for the picking here, and I'm excited about that as well. Unless there are any other final comments for tonight, I am prepared to conclude us for now. I think there are probably a million other questions I would ask, but I think I have the information I need to do the initial reporting.
Great. Thank you, Rashida. Appreciate it. This is great.
Thank you all so much for your commitment. It is genuine and quite evident. Thank you all so much.
Well, thank you, and don't hold back in that report. We want to hear it straight.
Will do, Dave. Will do.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Have
much.
a good night.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rashida.
Rashida.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think that that concludes our committee of the whole meeting. And so I will adjourn the meeting.